The door that was never locked. Stories of trust before fear was common. Where doors meant welcome, not defense. There was a time not written in history books, nor carved into monuments, when a locked door was a rare thing. A time when houses were more like hands held open, not fists clenched shut. A time when wood creaked not out of warning, but out of invitation. The door was never the enemy of the outside. It was the connection. A gentle boundary, yes, but one that moved with the wind, with the children's feet, with the scent of herbs. Boiling on someone else's stove, they say there was a village. No one recalls its name. And maybe that's because it wasn't just one village. It was many. Scattered across fields, across hills, across centuries. What made it special was not the size of its granaries, or the wealth of its merchants, but the simple fact that no door had ever known a lock. Wooden latches, yes. Cloth curtains. Drawn in winter, but never a key, never a bolt. Never the sound of metal sliding into place to say stay out. The children were the first to notice. Because children are always watching, even when you think they're only playing. They ran from one house to another, barefoot, muddy, laughing, and never once had to knock. A shout through the window, a wave through the frame, and they were inside. Welcomed like family, offered bread without ceremony, given a seat near the fire as if they had always belonged. Because they did. Trust in that place wasn't something earned. It was something assumed. Like the rising of the sun or the turning of the seasons, or the way water always flowed downhill. Of course you could enter. Of course you meant no harm. Of course you were one of us. And if you weren't, you became. It wasn't naive. It wasn't foolish. They knew the world had sharp edges. They knew strangers could carry danger. But they also knew that building a world out of fear would only invite more of it. So they chose differently. They chose open. Neighbors passed through each other's homes not as guests, but as threads passing through cloth. Someone's oven would bake 3 loaves, 1 for their house, 2 for homes where the bread had run out. Someone's child would sleep elsewhere that night, cradled by another mother's lullaby, because their own was busy in labor. People knew each other's coughs, each other's steps, each other's silences. There were no appointments, only arrivals. No visitors, only returning. Even the old ones, those who had seen war or loss or betrayal, kept their doors open because they remembered something we have almost forgotten. That safety doesn't always come from shutting things out. Sometimes it comes from letting people in. The houses were modest. Walls made of stone or clay, roofs that whispered in the rain. But they held within them a warmth that no hearth alone could offer. That warmth came from knowing you were never truly alone. Even in the night, even in grief, even when your fire had gone out and you had nothing left to offer, someone would enter. Not to take, but to give. And the doors stood open, not because they had nothing to steal, but because they believed what they had couldn't be stolen. You cannot steal trust. You cannot steal kindness. You cannot steal a life lived openly, generously, without fear. People today speak of security systems, of fences, of locks that beep and flash. But in that place, security was found in the interlocking of lives, not metal. Their system was each other, and the code was simple. Come in. Be kind. Stay a while. Leave with peace. The door, then, was never an obstacle. It was a threshold of belonging. And so it stayed, unlocked, unafraid, and ever so slightly open to whoever might come seeking shelter from a world that had forgotten how to trust. The first stranger, who was never asked to leave, they never asked his name, not because they didn't care, but because names took time and trust did not. He came at dusk, a shape in the fog. A quiet man with tired boots and a satchel that looked heavier than it was. No one saw him arrive. And yet, somehow, everyone noticed when the fire at the village's edge burned brighter that night. The old woman who lived nearest the edge had opened her door without hesitation. She always did. It had become second nature, as common as lighting. The oil lamp were pouring warm water over her arthritic hands. When she saw him, she simply stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "As if you always have." And he did. She didn't ask where he came from. She didn't ask what he carried. What mattered was what he brought with him and what he didn't. He didn't bring fear. He didn't bring noise. He didn't bring the air of someone who had come to stay too long or take too much. He brought quiet. He brought gratitude. He brought the stillness of someone who had walked far and simply needed to rest. The village noticed, as villages always do. Children spotted his figure the next morning, sitting near the stream with his boots off, washing them slowly, as if the cold water were a blessing. The baker's son waved at him. The stranger waved back. No hesitation. No shame. Just a man who had found something he hadn't expected. A place that didn't fear him. By the second day, he was helping mend a fence. No one asked him to. He saw the slats were loose and began fixing them, as if they were his own. By the third, he was chopping wood behind the church. By the fourth, he was teaching the children how to braid rope from old willow bark. Someone finally asked, "Will you stay long?" And he answered, "As long as I am not in the way." To which the old woman replied, "You aren't." That was enough. They never did learn much about him, where he was going, what he was leaving behind. He never offered. And no one pried. It was the way of that place. You were trusted into silence and into speech. Both were welcome. People often imagine that when strangers enter, safety must vanish. But in that village, strangers became safe not because they were inspected, but because they were embraced. Suspicion never grew because curiosity was gentle. It knocked softly. It smiled often. It listened more than it asked. Some nights, they'd see the stranger walking by moonlight, speaking to himself. Or maybe to the stars. Or maybe to the past. No one interrupted. They simply left a bowl of stew on the step. And by morning, it was always empty and always clean. There were no contracts. No oaths, no exchanges of coin. Only the quiet, timeless rhythm of coexistence. You give, you take, you stay. You go. And the door stays open in case you come again. On the 10th day, the stranger left. No farewell. No ceremony, but the children say he left a small carving behind. A piece of bark shaped like a heart, placed under a stone by the stream. It was enough. He had come. He had been held by their kindness. And then, like wind through a curtain, he had moved on. The villagers told the story for years. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was natural. Because it reminded them that once upon a time, a man could walk into a life and not be feared for it. The day everyone slept with their doors open. It wasn't planned. No one made an announcement. No one said, "Tonight we leave the doors unlatched." It simply happened. As naturally as the tide pulling back from shore, as softly as the wind laying down among the reeds. That evening, the sky was quiet, not empty quiet, as if the stars themselves were listening for something sacred rising from the rooftops. Baker's daughter forgot to close their door, and no one reminded her. The smith left his tools outside and didn't wake and worry. The priest snuffed out his candles and didn't pause at the bolt the way he usually did. And across the village, wooden doors rested slightly ajar, curtains moving with the night. Air like lungs breathing in trust. Nothing terrible had preceded this. There had been no danger. No storm to bring people together. No sermon to convince them. It was something gentler. Something earned slowly by 1,000 little moments of peace. A lost chicken returned. A missing child found playing by the creek. A loaf left on a doorstep by unseen hands. A stranger who mended fences and then vanished with grace. It all added up to a kind of knowing. We are safe because we are known. In other places, a door ajar would signal threat, a failure of vigilance. An invitation to theft. But here, a door. Left open was a blessing. It said, I have nothing to hide. I believe you won't take what is not yours. I trust the night will treat me kindly, because I live among the kind. Children slept soundly, faces turned toward the breeze. Old men left chairs out overnight and woke to find them covered only in dew, not disturbed by greedy hands. A cat wandered in and out of 3 homes, welcomed in each. A dog curled on a threshold that wasn't his own, but no one told him to leave. Even the wind seemed softer that night, as if it knew it had been allowed in. As if it were finally home. It wasn't about ignorance. These people weren't naive. They had known fear. Their grandfathers had faced wars. Their grandmothers had buried children. They understood danger, but they chose, consciously and tenderly, not to build their lives around it. They chose to leave room for the possibility that not all visitors come to harm, that not every knock is a threat, that the world, for all its sharp corners, also contains immense goodness. And so they slept, one by one. Lamps flickered out, fires dimmed, and the houses exhaled. And the open doors stood not as gaps in defense, but as monuments to the belief that fear did not belong between people who had nothing to gain from harming each other. Years later, children would ask their grandparents, "Did you really sleep with the doors open?" And the old ones would smile. "We did," they'd say, "because we trusted the dark the same way we trusted the day, to bring only what we were ready to receive." That one night turned into many. It became tradition. Not a rule, a rhythm. On warm nights, on full moons, on harvest eves, they would leave their doors ajar as a symbol, not just of welcome, but of remembrance, that once, long ago, they had believed in each other enough to let the air flow freely from home to home without fear. The house with no walls, only a roof of stars. It was never meant to be a home. Not in the way homes are usually built. There were no bricks, no measurements, no corners to contain it, just 4 poles, a patch of grass, and a roof made entirely of open sky. They called it the sky room, though it wasn't a room at all. It was more of an idea someone had once whispered that took root like a seed in the village soil. And like all things not forced, it grew. The space had no owner. It belonged to no family, yet served them all. By day, it was shade for the tired. By evening, it was a place to meet. And by night, it became something holy. A gathering place for stories too delicate to be told within walls. A sanctuary for grief, too quiet for funerals. For laughter too loud for bedtime. For silence too full to be ignored. Children first discovered its magic. They laid down in its center, hands behind heads, counting stars until numbers lost meaning. They pointed at constellations their elders had long forgotten. They gave them new names: the sleeping dog, the open palm, the door without a key. Each name a wish, a memory, a promise. The sky room welcomed them all. No door, no invitation, no closing time. The carpenter sat there once, his tools still on his belt, tears drying on his cheeks as he spoke aloud to his father who had died many winters ago. No one disturbed him. An hour later, he rose, lighter, not healed, but held. In a world that often built too many walls, between homes, between hearts, between histories, this place remained wall-less. It refused to divide. It refused to defend. It only invited. The stars, unashamed of their age, listened without blinking. The wind, with nowhere to hide, danced around the poles like a guardian, and the villagers, young and old, came to feel that they too could live with fewer walls inside themselves. One winter, a child asked, "Why don't we build walls around it to keep the warmth in?" And the elder replied, "Because its warmth doesn't come from walls. It comes from knowing we are together beneath the same sky." It became the place for first kisses, for final confessions, for midnight songs sung off-key, but with full hearts. No one claimed ownership. And because no one owned it, everyone belonged to it. Even travelers, when they passed through, the villagers would guide them not to an inn, but to the sky room. Sleep there, they'd say. The stars will keep you company, and in the morning we'll be here. Sometimes the wind brought petals from distant fields. Sometimes it carried ashes. But always it brought something. And always the people received it with the same open-heartedness they showed each other. When asked why they kept such a strange place, the answer was simple: because even the sky needs a home sometimes. And perhaps, in keeping that space open, they had made room not just for the sky, but for something rarer, a life lived without fear of exposure. A world built not on what could be lost, but on what could be shared, the key that was never forged. There was a time in the village's history when a blacksmith was asked to forge a key. The request came from a distant cousin visiting from another land, a place of iron fences, padlocks on every gate, and suspicion braided into every conversation. He stood in the forge, watching the sparks fly, and asked, "Why don't your doors have locks?" The blacksmith, a broad-shouldered man with soot permanently etched into his knuckles, tilted his head and smiled. "Because we never forged a key." The visitor laughed, thinking it a joke. But the blacksmith didn't laugh. He looked at the embers glowing in the fire pit and said softly, "To make a key is to admit that you expect something to be taken." And in this village, they had not yet made that admission. It's not that they didn't know how. The forge had seen all manner of tools, nails, hinges, delicate mechanisms. The knowledge was there, but no one had asked. And so, no one had made one. The absence of keys was not from lack of skill. It was a choice, as deliberate as it was gentle. Over time, the story of the key that was never forged became a kind of parable passed down to children alongside lullabies. It was said that should someone ever make the first key, the village would feel it in the wind, in the way the trees leaned, in the heaviness of shared glances. Something would shift, something would close, but no one did. Not even when things were stolen. And yes, sometimes they were. A jar of honey, a borrowed cloak that was never returned, a bundle of firewood taken from the wrong porch. When those things happened, people didn't reach for locks. They reached for conversation. And more often than not, they found the taker was someone with more need than malice. And so the response was rarely punishment. It was presence. An extra loaf baked, an offer of warmth, a question asked gently, "Do you need more than you have?" The absence of keys didn't mean perfection. It meant preference, a preference for transparency over secrecy, for approach over avoidance, for faith over fear. One day, a young apprentice in the forge, a child of about 10, held up a lump of metal and said, "I want to make a key." The blacksmith paused. "Why?" The boy shrugged. "Just because. I've never seen one." The man nodded slowly. "Then let's make one, but not to fit any door." And together, they forged a key with no matching lock. It became a necklace, worn by the boy, passed down through generations, a reminder that keys can exist as symbols of choice, not necessity. That key was never used to close anything, but it opened minds. Visitors would ask about it, and each time they'd hear the same gentle truth: we made a key so we would never have to make a lock. No one remembers when the key was last seen. Some say it hangs beneath the sky room, buried in the grass. Others say it was returned to the fire as an offering. But everyone remembers what it meant, that even in a world tempted by fear, it's possible to live a life without turning the key in your neighbor's heart. The stranger who gave back what was never taken. She arrived on a rainy afternoon. A woman in a faded green cloak, soaked to the skin, with no cart, no bags, only a satchel made of thick canvas pressed tightly to her chest. The streets of the village had turned to streams. Water lapped at thresholds. People stood under awnings, watching her pass in silence, but no door was closed. And so, when she paused, exhausted, shivering, a boy stepped forward, not more than 7. He pointed to his home and said simply, "You can come in. Mama has soup." She didn't speak for hours. Sat by the fire, steaming bowl in hand, clothes drying on a wooden peg. The mother offered her a blanket. The father pulled another stool to the hearth, and still, the woman said nothing. But she stayed. It wasn't until the third day that she opened the satchel. By then, the village had taken her in as they always did. Someone had sewn a patch on her cloak. Someone else had braided her wet hair. Children had sat near her feet, pretending not to watch her with curious eyes. She had smiled once, just once, when a baby reached out and grabbed her finger. It was enough to warm everyone. On the third day, she went to the edge of the village where the sky room stood. She placed the satchel in the center and opened it slowly. Inside was a small wooden box, carved with unfamiliar symbols, bound with a ribbon tied in a knot that looked far too ancient for her young hands. She opened the box, and inside, nothing, or so it seemed, but the woman exhaled like she had been carrying something heavy for many years that had now disappeared. She whispered, "I've brought back what I took." Someone nearby, the village weaver, watched from a respectful distance. "What was it?" he asked softly. The woman looked up, eyes full of something deeper than sorrow, something older than grief. "It wasn't mine," she said. "I carried it, but it was never mine to keep. Fear, regret, a story that wasn't mine, but I believed it was." She stayed in the village for a while. Not long, just enough to be remembered and to forget a few things of her own. She helped patch roofs, taught the children to whistle using blades of grass, sang lullabies in a language no one else spoke, but everyone understood. And when she left, she didn't take the satchel. She left it in the sky room, empty, but not hollow. It had become something else, a vessel for whatever needed to be returned. Without blame, villagers began adding their own offerings, a letter never sent, a lock of hair, a drawing of someone they once feared. No one guarded it, no one claimed it. It belonged to all. And in that way, what was once a burden became a ritual, a practice of giving back what was never yours. Shame, guilt, suspicion, wounds you inherited but never chose. The stranger's name was never known, but her presence was permanent. Some say she was a spirit, others, just a traveler who had wandered too long with someone else's pain. But one thing was certain: she gave the village a gift without asking for thanks. A way to release without having to explain. A way to heal without needing to be broken first. The night they forgot to close the gate, and nothing went wrong. There was a gate. A simple one, wooden, worn smooth by time, hinged with iron and painted once upon a time a shade of blue that had long since faded into the grain. It marked the edge of the village, not a wall, not a fence, just a gesture, a place where the wild met the known, where the path became cobblestone, and where arrival became belonging. They always closed it at night, not because they feared what lay beyond, but out of habit. The same way one covers a sleeping child, not for fear of cold, but for the comfort of ritual. But one evening, during the harvest celebration, with lanterns lit and music echoing across the hills, the gate was forgotten. No one noticed at first. The children were chasing one another, draped in ribbons. Old men were drinking sweet cider and singing songs no one remembered the origin of. The baker's youngest was learning to dance by stepping on her brother's toes. And the gate, silent and obedient for decades, stood open, swaying gently with the breeze, welcoming the night as if it too had been invited. Hours passed. Laughter softened, songs quieted. The moon rose high and looked down upon a village that had never locked itself away from joy. And yet, nothing happened. No intruder came. No animal wandered in. No thief, no shadow, no storm. Only stillness, and the rustle of leaves, and a soft hush, as if the night was standing at the threshold with a smile on its face, choosing not to enter, but to bless. In the morning, The gate remained open. The first to rise was the healer. She noticed it and paused, expecting some sign, hoofprints, missing tools. A note slipped through the crack in the church door. But there was nothing, just peace. News spread slowly. Not with panic, but with wonder. They forgot the gate. Whispered a farmer, and nothing happened, added his wife. Or maybe something did happen, said the old poet. We just don't know what it was yet. The council met that afternoon, not to assign blame, just to talk, and what they decided was this. Perhaps the gate had never been there to keep anything out. Perhaps it was only ever a symbol, and like all symbols, its meaning could change. So they left it open again, that night, and the next. And eventually, always, the gate became a new kind of ritual. People began leaving small gifts by it. A loaf of bread, a sprig of lavender, a carved figurine of a fox, not as warnings, as welcomes. Children drew chalk arrows on the path with the words, "Come sit with us." Strangers came, some stayed, some only passed through, but none ever crossed with violence. Because when a place tells you, without words, that you are trusted, it awakens the part of you that longs to deserve that trust. The gate became a monument, not of fear, but of forgetting. The kind of forgetting that matters. Forgetting to be afraid. Forgetting to assume the worst. Forgetting that doors must always be locked and hearts must always be guarded. Years later, an elder told a child, "We didn't leave the gate open by accident. We just finally remembered we never needed to close it in the first place." The candle left in every window. It began with one candle, a small one, barely taller than a thumb, set in a clear glass holder, its flame steady even as the wind pressed softly against the window pane. It belonged to an old woman who lived on the hill, widowed, quiet, rarely seen in the square. She lit it not out of tradition, but because she had a feeling that someone, somewhere, might be trying to find their way home. That night, a traveler walked the edge of the village. He had no map, only tired feet and a name in his heart that had long since faded from memory. He saw the candle, not bright, not calling attention to itself, just there, like it had always been waiting for him. And so he knocked. The woman opened the door as if she had been expecting him. She didn't ask who he was, didn't ask what he wanted. She just stepped aside and said, "Soup's still warm." Word of the candle spread, though the old woman never mentioned it. Others had simply seen its glow and wondered, what if I lit one too? And so it began. Not a festival, not a custom, a quiet uprising of hope. One candle, then another, then 10, then 30. Until every home had a light in the window every night, no matter the season. At first, no one knocked. Then slowly, strangers began to appear. A boy who had run from a city too loud. A woman who had lost her name in the sound of grief. A man who had forgotten how to sit still without shame. Each one drawn in by the simple language of light. And something beautiful happened. The villagers didn't interrogate the wanderers. They didn't ask, "Where did you come from?" or "What are you running from?" They only asked, "Are you hungry? Would you like to rest? Do you want to stay the night?" And the travelers, some of them used to locks and passwords, and suspicion, cried the first time they were welcomed without explanation. Eventually, the candlelight came to mean more than a welcome for strangers. It became a message to each other. A way of saying, "I'm still here. You are not alone. There is still warmth in the world." Children were taught to light the candle even before they learned to write their names. Not for safety, but for remembrance. So that no one would forget how it felt to be waited for. And over time the candles began to appear outside the village. 2 dotted crossroads. On stumps, on stones left intentionally near the woods. Little lanterns, little hopes, like stars that had fallen to the ground, just to remind the earth that light belongs here. 2. No one ever stole them. No one blew them out, because they weren't just wax and fire. They were promises unspoken, but understood. that someone somewhere was being thought of, wished well, held in heart even if they had never met. There are some who still say that if you walk long enough through forest or fog and look carefully, you'll find a candle. Just one, in a window, flickering like a heartbeat, and if you follow it, you'll find a door that has never been locked. And a voice that says, "We were waiting for you." The night the wind brought everyone closer. It wasn't a storm, not quite. There was no lightning, no thunder, just wind, fierce full, whispering across the rooftops like a voice that had something urgent to say, but didn't want to shout. It came at twilight, as the village lamps began to glow and the candles in windows cast their nightly warmth. And with it came a hush, not of fear, but of listening. People paused, in their kitchens, on their porches, in the paths between houses. The wind wasn't angry, it wasn't cold, but it carried something. Some said it smelled like rosemary. Others, like smoke, or rain that had never fallen. But everyone agreed, it stirred something in their chest, memory they hadn't thought about in years, a longing they had forgotten how to name. One by one, without plan or announcement, the villagers stepped outside. Old men wrapped in shawls, children in their nightgowns, mothers with babies pressed to their shoulders. No one spoke. They just walked, not away from something, but toward each other, drawn by the wind and the knowing that sometimes presence is louder than words. They gathered in the sky room. Of course they did. Where else would one go when the world speaks softly through weather? No one led. No one stood above the rest. They simply sat, close, in silence, shoulders touching, hands brushing in quiet acknowledgement. And in that moment, as the wind danced between them, they realized something. They had all been holding a small ache. Different in shape, but similar in weight. A girl missed her sister who had married and moved away. A boy feared he would grow too old and forget the lullaby his grandmother once sang. A father still carried guilt for words said in anger many years before. Each story was different, but that night, beneath the open sky, they shared one truth: that pain carried together becomes less sharp, less private, less shameful. And so one by one, they began to speak. Not all at once, not loudly. Just softly. A phrase, a sentence, a tear. Then a hand on a back, a breath released, a nod that said, "I understand." And the wind? It moved gently between them, lifting hair, cooling flushed cheeks, tugging at hems and sleeves like a child asking to be noticed. They said it was the wind that brought them together. But maybe it was always in them, this need to be seen without being judged, to be close without needing permission. The wind had only reminded them. By the time dawn touched the horizon, many had fallen asleep leaning against one another. Children curled in laps, friends huddled like siblings, old lovers holding hands as if rediscovering touch. The sky room had never been so full, or so quiet, and when the sun rose, not a single person wished they had stayed indoors. They say that every few years the wind returns, not always at twilight, not always in autumn, but always with that same whisper, "Come closer." And the village listens, still, because they remember what it felt like to be part of something without having